I stared at the empty shelf for a long time before I understood what I was looking at. My late wife's music box, the one her mother had given her the Christmas before she passed, was gone. The little oval patch of dust around where it used to sit was still there, like a ghost of the thing itself. I dusted around it for 3 years, never moved it, never touched it. Just let it sit there on the third shelf of the living room bookcase, between her copy of The Bridges of Madison County and the ceramic cardinal she'd bought at a craft fair in Vermont. Gone. I called out to my son-in-law, no answer. His truck was still in the driveway. I walked through the house, the kitchen, the back porch, the garage, and found nothing but the ordinary mess of a Tuesday afternoon. Then I noticed the garage sale sticker on the shelf, a small orange circle, the kind you buy in a pack of 500 at the dollar store. 50 cents. She had been marked at 50 cents. My name is Roy. I'm 61 years old. I taught high school history for 27 years in Roanoke, Virginia, and I retired this spring after my wife Lorraine died. I didn't plan to retire that soon. But walking into that building every day, smiling at students, pretending I was okay, I couldn't do it anymore. So I packed up my classroom, turned in my badge, and came home to a house that was too quiet in every room. Lorraine and I were married for 33 years. We weren't a perfect couple. We argued about money, about the thermostat, about whether her sister could stay with us for just 1 more week, which always turned into 3. But she was my person. The one I called when anything happened, good or bad. When my football team won. When my brother got sick. When I couldn't sleep and the house felt like it was pressing in on me. She was the one I reached for. She died of ovarian cancer. 18 months from diagnosis to the end. We spent the first 6 months fighting like hell, and the last 12 accepting what was coming. I held her hand at the end. She was calm. I was not. Our daughter, Brooke, was 29 when her mother died. She'd gotten married 2 years before to a man named Wade. I want to be fair to Wade. He's not evil. He's just the kind of man who moves through life without ever really thinking about what things mean to other people. Practical to the point of being cold. He once asked me, 3 weeks after the funeral, whether I planned to sell the house because property values in our neighborhood were trending upward. I didn't answer him. I just walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water and stared out the window until I heard him leave. Brooke is a good woman. She got her mother's warmth and my stubbornness, which is not always a useful combination. After Lorraine died, she checked on me regularly. Sunday dinners, phone calls, dropping by with groceries I hadn't asked for. I appreciated it, I really did, but she also had a blind spot for Wade. A wide one. The music box. Lorraine's mother, June, had found it at an estate sale in 1987. It was old, made in Switzerland. The kind with a hand-painted lid showing a mountain scene in blues and greens. When you opened it, it played a waltz. Lorraine never told me which one, and I never thought to ask, the way you don't think to ask about things you assume will always be there. After June died, the music box came to live with us. Lorraine kept it in the bedroom for years, then moved it to the bookcase when we repainted. After Lorraine died, I couldn't open it. I tried once, about 6 months in, and the waltz came out and I had to sit down on the floor right there and just breathe for a while. I left it closed after that. But I liked knowing it was there. Some mornings I'd come downstairs and look at it on my way to the kitchen. The way you glance at a photo of someone you miss. Not to feel the grief again, just to feel the connection. I'd told Brooke about the music box. Not once, several times. I told her it was going to her someday. I told her what it meant. She knew. What I did not know, what I found out later, was that Wade had been quietly organizing a garage sale for weeks. Brooke knew. She told me it was just some boxes from the basement and some old furniture from the spare room. I said, fine, go ahead, whatever helps. I didn't think to give her a list of what not to touch because I didn't think I needed to. I was wrong about that. I found Wade in the backyard that afternoon, stacking leftover boxes from the sale. He looked up when he heard the screen door. Hey, Roy, he said, like it was any Tuesday. Where's the music box? I asked. He squinted at me. Which one? The one on the bookcase. Third shelf, the one with the mountain painting on the lid. He set down the box he was carrying. Oh, yeah, that sold this morning. Lady from down the street got $4 for it. I heard myself say, $4. I heard myself say, $4. I know, I probably could have gotten more. Thing was nice. He shrugged. I figured since it was just sitting there. It wasn't just sitting there, I said. My voice came out quieter than I expected. That was Lorraine's. That was her mother's before that. He looked at me with an expression I can only describe as mild inconvenience. Roy, Brooke and I are trying to clear out some space. We talked about moving some stuff around. You didn't talk to me about that. I thought Brooke did. She didn't. He picked up the box again. I can try to track down the woman who bought it if that's important to you. If that's important to you. Like it was a preference. Like I'd said I didn't care much for mushrooms on my pizza. I walked back inside before I said something I couldn't take back. I got the name of the woman who bought it from a neighbor who'd been at the sale. A retired teacher named Alice who'd lived on our block for 40 years and had more sense than most people I knew. She'd seen the music box. She'd noticed it, actually, and had nearly bought it herself, but had let it go to the other woman when she saw how interested she was. The buyer was a woman named Patricia. No, wait, let me think. Her name was Claire. Claire Dobbins. She lived 3 streets over, in one of the older Cape Cods near the elementary school. I drove there that evening. I rang the doorbell, and a woman in her late 50s answered. She had kind eyes, the kind that take you in before they decide what to think about you. I'm Roy Alderman, I said. I live on Hawthorne Street. I think you bought a music box at my daughter's garage sale this morning, and I need to ask you about it. I'm sorry to come like this. I know it's strange. She looked at me for a moment, then opened the door wider. Come in, she said. She had it on her kitchen table. She'd been cleaning it when I knocked. The little mountain scene was facing me when I walked in, blues and greens exactly as I remembered. And for a second I couldn't say anything. It's a beautiful piece, Claire said quietly. I could tell it was old. My wife's mother bought it in 1987, I said. My wife passed away 3 years ago. I didn't know it was in the sale. It wasn't supposed to be. Claire looked at me, then at the box, then back at me. Do you want it back? I'll pay you whatever you want, I said. Whatever you feel is fair. Mr. Alderman, she said, and she said it gently, the way I used to talk to my students when they were carrying something too heavy. Take it home. I tried to give her the cash in my wallet, $40, which was all I had, and she wouldn't take it. I stood in her kitchen doorway not knowing what to say, and she said, My husband passed 2 years ago. I know what you're talking about. I thanked her. I meant it in a way that's hard to explain. I sat in my car outside Claire's house for a while before I drove home. The music box was on the passenger seat. I didn't open it. I just let it sit there. On the way home, I started thinking more clearly. The fog of the afternoon was lifting, and underneath it was something harder. Wade had done something careless and thoughtless, yes. But this wasn't the first time. The man had spent 3 years treating my house like a problem to be managed, and my grief like an inconvenience to be worked around. He'd asked about selling the house. He'd suggested I donate most of Lorraine's clothes because you're not going to look at them. He'd offered once to help me sort through her books. I'd always said no. Calmly. Politely. The way you do when you're trying to keep the peace for your daughter's sake. But this time, he hadn't asked. I went home. I put the music box back on the shelf. I called Brooke. She came over the next morning without Wade, which told me she already knew something was wrong. We sat at the kitchen table with coffee, and I told her what had happened. She listened. Her face went through several things while I talked. Surprise, embarrassment, guilt. I didn't know he took things from the shelves in there, she said. I told him the basement box is in the spare room. I didn't say anything about the living room. He doesn't think he needs to ask, I said. That's the problem. Dad, I got it back, I said. That's not the point. The point is that man has been making decisions about my house and my things and my wife's things for 3 years, and he does it because nobody has told him he can't. I paused. I'm telling him now. Brooke was quiet. I love you, I said, and I'm not trying to make your life harder, but there are things in this house that are not furniture. They are not clutter. They meant something to your mother, and they mean something to me, and your husband does not get to price them at $4 and hand them to a stranger. She looked at her coffee cup for a long time. I know, she said finally, very quietly. I know you're right. That wasn't the end of it. I want to be honest. It got worse before it got better. 2 weeks later, Brooke came back over alone. She sat down at the same kitchen table and told me something she'd been holding on to for a long time. She and Wade had been having financial trouble. Real trouble. Credit card debt they'd run up over the past 2 years, a second car loan, the kind of slow accumulation that sneaks up on you. Wade had been looking for ways to generate quick cash. That's why the garage sale. That's why he'd gone through more of the house than you was supposed to. He thought you wouldn't notice, she said, or that you'd let it go. He thought wrong. I know. I asked her how bad the debt was. She told me. It was bad enough to make me put down my coffee cup. Here's what I want to say about what came next, because I know people will have opinions about it. Some people think when family is in trouble, you help. No questions asked. Some people think you need to protect yourself first. I'm 61, living on a teacher's pension and Lorraine's small life insurance policy, and I was not in a position to absorb someone else's financial chaos. But she was my daughter. And none of this was really about the money. I'll help you, I told Brooke. Not him. You. There's a difference. I called a financial counselor I knew from church, a woman named Vera who did pro bono work for families in trouble. She sat down with Brooke, without Wade, because Brooke agreed that was important, and helped her map out a real plan. I covered 3 months of their minimum payments while Brooke works the plan. That was my contribution. Not a blank check, not a rescue, a bridge. What I would not do was let Wade come back into my house and treat it as though his practical limitations had any authority over what was mine. That conversation happened on a Thursday afternoon. On Sunday, I asked Brooke to bring him over for dinner. I made a pot roast, because that's what I make when I need to have a hard conversation. Something that takes time, that you can't rush, that fills the house with a smell that says, this is still a home. Wade sat across from me and I waited until dessert, apple pie from the bakery on Route 11, before I said anything. I told him directly without anger that what he'd done was not okay. That the music box was not a 50-cent item at a garage sale. That it was one of the last pieces of Lorraine that still existed in this world. That I understood he was dealing with stress I hadn't fully known about. But that stress was not a license to make decisions about my wife's belongings. He started to say something about meaning well, and I held up my hand. I know you meant well, I said. You usually do. But meaning well doesn't cover the cost of what nearly got lost. He was quiet for a minute. Then he said, I should have asked you. I'm sorry. It wasn't a big speech. It wasn't emotional. But it was direct, and from Wade, direct was about as honest as it got. I nodded. That's all I needed, I said. And I meant it. After they left that night, I washed the dishes and dried them and put them away, and then I went to the living room and sat in my recliner in the dark. I opened the music box. The waltz came out, small and clear and a little mechanical, the way old music boxes sound. And I just sat there and listened to it all the way through. When it finished, I wound it again and listened again. I did this 3 or 4 times. I still don't know which waltz it is. I looked it up once online but never found a definitive answer. I decided I don't need one. It's Lorraine's waltz. That's enough. I started doing something different that fall. I'd been so focused on keeping the house preserved, keeping everything exactly as it was, that I'd stopped living in it. I'd been maintaining a museum instead of a home, dusting around things instead of touching them, moving through rooms like a guest. I started cooking real meals again instead of heating things up. I started having people over. Alice from down the block, a few friends from the school where I taught, my brother and his wife from up in Maryland. I set the table properly. I used the good dishes that Lorraine had saved for company, because I'd finally understood that there was no company coming that was worth saving them for more than the people already in my life. I kept the music box on the shelf. But I opened it sometimes now, not every day, just when I felt like it. In the spring, I took a trip I'd been putting off for years. A week in the Smoky Mountains, hiking trails Lorraine and I had always talked about, but never gotten to. I went alone. I want to be clear. I went alone, not lonely. There's a difference, and it took me 3 years to understand it. I drove there on a Tuesday in April with a cooler in the back seat and no particular schedule. I hiked every day until my knees told me to stop. And then I sat on rocks above streams and ate sandwiches and watched the water and didn't think about anything in particular. On the last morning, I sat outside the cabin and drank coffee while the mountains were still in shadow. I thought about Lorraine. Not the cancer, not the last months, not the hospital. I thought about her the way she was before all that, the way she laughed at her own jokes before she got to the punchline, the way she'd steal the blanket and then deny it with complete conviction, the way she held my hand in the car without either of us noticing we'd reached for each other. I thought about what she'd say if she saw me sitting there. She would have made fun of my hiking boots, which I bought at a discount outdoor store and which were objectively ugly. She would have asked whether I'd been eating enough vegetables. Then she would have sat down next to me, and we would have watched the mountains come into the light together without needing to say anything. I miss her every day. I am also, still, here. Those two things coexist, and I've stopped trying to resolve the tension between them. I drove home on a Saturday. I walked in, put down my bag, and looked at the shelf. The music box was right where I'd left it. I went to the kitchen and made coffee, and then I came back and wound it up, and the waltz played through the quiet house, and I stood there and listened to the whole thing. That felt like enough. That felt like exactly enough. I've thought a lot about what would have happened if I hadn't noticed the dust ring on that shelf. If I'd walked past it the way I walked past so many things in those years after Lorraine died, head down, just trying to get through the day. The music box would have ended up in a stranger's home, and I never would have known what was inside it. Not the waltz, not the weight of it in my hands, not the thing I'd been keeping myself from for 3 years without even fully understanding. That's what I was doing. There's a version of me that doesn't look at the shelf that afternoon. That version is still sitting in a house that feels like a museum, still moving around things instead of touching them, still waiting for a grief that will never fully finish before he allows himself to start living again. I'm glad I'm not that version. What Wade did was careless. I want to be honest about that without turning him into a villain, because he isn't one. He's a man who moves through the world without asking what things cost other people. Not in money, but in meaning. That's its own kind of failure, but it's a common one. Most people who cause real pain aren't monsters. They're just not paying attention. They're focused on the practical problem in front of them, and they don't stop to ask what they might be standing on while they solve it. The harder question for me wasn't what to do about Wade. It was what I was going to do with myself. Because I realized, sitting in my car outside Claire's house with that music box on the passenger seat, that I'd been using grief as a reason to stay still. I'd convinced myself that honoring Lorraine meant keeping everything exactly as it was. That touching things, opening things, changing things, that would be a kind of forgetting. And I was wrong about that. Lorraine would have been the first person to tell me I was wrong about that. What I understand now is this: you don't honor someone by freezing the world around their absence. You honor them by staying in the world, by cooking real meals and setting the table properly and using the good dishes on ordinary Tuesdays, by taking the trip you always talked about, even if you have to take it alone, by winding up the music box and listening to the waltz all the way through, even when it makes you sit down on the floor and breathe for a while, especially then. I'm not the man I was when Lorraine was alive. That man needed her to be complete, and she's gone, and I've had to figure out what I am without her. That's not something that happens once. It happens slowly, in small moments. A Sunday dinner, a conversation I don't avoid, a morning in the mountains when I finally stop waiting for the grief to finish and just sit with the coffee and the light. Brooke called me last week, just to talk. She sounded lighter than she had in a long time. She asked about my knees, which I appreciated. She said Wade had been asking before doing things lately, and she said it like it was a small thing. It wasn't a small thing. I told her I was doing okay, and I meant it in a way I hadn't for a while. The music box is on the shelf. I open it when I feel like it. The waltz plays the same every time. Small, clear, a little mechanical. Exactly right.